well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad to be with you behind the microphone. Not only because I actually enjoy doing this each and every day, but as I mentioned on yesterday's program, there was a visit to the vet this morning, and I was fully prepared to be taking the rest of the day off because I thought we might have to say goodbye to my 8-year-old Great Pyrenees, but she has at least a week's reprieve. We are going to, well, there's no reason to get into the all of the details of the medical stuff, but we're gonna give it another go, and hopefully we'll see some improvement here. So appreciate all of the kind words and the thoughts and the prayers, and like I said, I'm glad to be back behind the microphone today. We're going to be talking about a piece at The Atlantic, of all places, talking about crime in Chicago. The Atlantic, I think it probably describes itself as like a center-left publication. Certainly not home to a lot of pro-gun journalism. And this piece by Michael Powell is not pro-gun. What's interesting, though, is that it talks about crime in Chicago without playing up the idea that more gun control is needed. Powell's piece is called "Crime in Chicago is a Choice: The Problem with Minimizing the City's Violence." And it's pretty interesting, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to focus. Well, the main reason I wanted to focus on it today. So he starts out by talking about the murder of this off-duty Chicago police officer. You might remember this case, Ariana Preston. She had finished her shift. She was still in uniform. She parked across the street from her house, and she was the victim of a shooting. The 4 suspects who've been arrested have not gone to trial yet, so I'll use the word allegedly, but the prosecutors say that they allegedly targeted Preston because they were essentially looking for money. And they saw her still in uniform, shot at her. She returned fire, but was struck in the face and the neck. One of the assailants grabbed her gun. They fled off into the darkness. And Powell uses this as sort of a jumping off point to talk about what he calls Chicago's inability to solve its decades-long violent crime problem. He says that Preston and her mom, Dion Moon, had tried to ward off the violence around them, but still couldn't avoid it. And he says Preston's own police department failed her. The shot spotter sensor technology that the city used marked the sound of 8 shots and relayed the address to police dispatchers. Preston's smartwatch alerted dispatchers to what it detected as a car crash and also conveyed the address. Yet, he writes, on a busy night for the police, 31 minutes passed before an officer arrived and found Preston lying on the sidewalk. 31 minutes. Now, Powell notes that politicians in Chicago have blamed gun laws in other states for Chicago's crime, but it sounds like he doesn't really buy it. He also talks about Donald Trump sending the National Guard into Chicago, or at least attempting to. And, of course, being the Atlantic, Powell takes a dim view of Donald Trump's move to put National Guard on these streets to fight violent crime. But he also says Democratic politicians have taken the president's bait. Chicago, they argue, is not as violent as it once was. Crime in some cities in Republican-run states, they say, is worse, and red state gun stores will sell many of the weapons that Chicago men slip into their belts and their hoodies. Governor J.B. Pritzker, who has said that Trump's threats against the city suggest that he has dementia, took a walk last month along the Chicago lakefront with an NBC reporter. The reporter recited a litany of recent shootings and asked the governor whether he would advise friends to take the city's public transit system at night. The gun-free public transit system, I should note. Pritzker waved that off, Powell writes. Trump, quote, has no idea that crime has gone way down in the city of Chicago, he said. He added, every crime, of course, is a tragedy. Mayor Brandon Johnson recently angered many in Chicago, not least the state's attorney and police officers, when he insisted that, quote, jails and incarceration and law enforcement is a sickness that has not led to safe communities. Note, by the way, that Brandon Johnson's all in favor of gun control laws that are enforced by police officers that lead to people being put in prison for nonviolent possessory offenses, right? Now, I wish that Powell had sort of explored that dichotomy of these anti-gun politicians who are also apparently anti-police and anti-law enforcement, because I gotta say, that's a head-scratcher for me. But I am glad to see that Powell just sort of dismisses the idea that red state gun stores are to blame for Chicago's crime, and instead says what these politicians refuse to acknowledge is that violent crime in Chicago remains a serious problem. The number of homicides has indeed, he says, dropped from a recent peak of 805 in 2021 and stands at 347 so far this year. Now, again, that's great news. That's remarkable progress, right? But he says New York City, with a population more than 3 times that of Chicago, has recorded 255 homicides this year. Most recent homicide tally for Los Angeles, which has about 1 million more residents than Chicago, stood at 217. Chicago, in the same year that officials celebrated the safest summer in 6 decades, could end up with roughly 4 times as many homicides as New York, and be twice as deadly as Los Angeles. So, yes, violent crime is improving in Chicago, but violent crime is still a problem in Chicago. He notes the homicide rate in the deadliest neighborhoods remains dozens of times higher than those of Chicago's safest neighborhoods, mostly upper middle class neighborhoods, and mostly white neighborhoods compared to the deadliest neighborhoods, which are majority black. Powell writes, I reported on New York's crack and crime epidemic in the early 1990s and on the wave of homicides in Washington, D.C. later in the decade. As violent crime fell dramatically in those cities and elsewhere, I wondered why Chicago remained so bloody in comparison. Disinvestment and industrial decline are part of the answer. Those forces, he says, led about 1 million people to move out of the city over decades and left many black and Latino neighborhoods blighted and dangerous. Another, though, he says, is the ineffectiveness of the Chicago Police Department, which he argues has moved far too slowly into the 21st century and has never managed to bring these cities' gangs to heel. Perhaps most troubling of all, he says, the city's political leadership, which Democrats have dominated for nearly a century, has tolerated disorder for far too long. Some politicians, he says, talk of killings as they might talk about the weather, as a sort of implacable force. Now, again, Powell talks about the rise in homicides in New York in the 1990s, or Washington, D.C. in the 1990s, in New York as well. Both of those cities had restrictive gun control laws in place when they saw homicide rates rise. Washington, D.C. had a ban on handguns during that time period, right? So, again, while Powell's focus is not on gun control, we talk a lot about that here on this program, and I would simply note that despite those restrictive gun laws that were in place in the Big Apple and in Washington, D.C., again, homicides far above the national average, which is still the case, by the way, in Washington, D.C. at the very least, with, again, some of the most restrictive gun laws in the nation. Now, Powell then turns to what Chicago might be able to do. And again, he does not suggest that gun control is the answer. He doesn't also get into the fact that Illinois already has most of the laws in place that gun control advocates say will make us safer. Universal background checks, bans on so-called assault weapons and large capacity magazines, red flag laws. I don't think Illinois has a waiting period, although I could be wrong about that. But the biggies are already there. And again, plenty of people illegally carrying firearms, plenty of people illegally using firearms in the commission of violent crimes. So what could be done? Again, Powell talks about the need to modernize the police force, the need to deal seriously with gangs, and not just from a policing perspective, but from a cultural perspective. He spoke to Diane Moon, who was Adriana Preston's mom, who was threatened when she showed up at the bond hearing for the individuals who are charged with killing her daughter. She actually had to have police officers posted outside of her home because of the death threats that were made against her for speaking out about her daughter's murder. And Dan Moon said, listen, you can't just blame the police and politicians here. When somebody's kid is not at home at 11 o'clock at night, that's a family thing. That's a cultural thing. And she's absolutely right about that. It's not just the politicians that are tolerating this disorder. I would say there are far too many residents. There are far too many parents, brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors who are tolerating that disorder as well. But Powell also spoke to Jens Lundwig. You might remember this name. He's the director of the University of Chicago Crime Lab. He came out with a book, I think it was earlier this year, in which he argues, and I think I would say that Jens Lundwig is a soft supporter of gun control. I don't think he is somebody who would say, we need to take some of these gun laws off the books. But he also, I think, is cognizant of the fact that, again, even with all of the gun control laws that you can imagine, criminals are still going to illegally acquire and illegally use firearms. So I think it's fair to say, maybe he would dispute this, that Ludwig does not believe that gun control is the primary way to combat violent crime, and maybe not even a great way to combat violent crime. He certainly did not mention gun control to Powell, or at least Powell didn't bring up any comments that Jens Ludwig made about gun control in his piece. Instead, he says that Ludwig told him that efforts to rebuild the city's troubled neighborhoods might be the only social programs that truly matter in attacking violent crime. He pointed to a study in which organizations picked vacant lots at random in Philadelphia and cleaned and beautified them, putting up fences around many. Crime fell around those same lots. He says changes to the built environment make a remarkable difference. Now, we might hear that and roll our eyes like, oh, why does that make a difference? But his attitude, it's almost the community version of broken windows policing. Broken windows policing is the theory that if you deal with small crimes, you can stop the people who are committing these small crimes from escalating into greater offenses. And I think this approach is, when you're dealing with these communities that have high levels of violence, changing that physical environment. And Powell talks about thousands of vacant lots in the city of Chicago where houses and businesses have been torn down. Nothing has taken their place. The idea is that it instills in those residents a sense that these places don't really matter, right? That the community, that the civic authorities don't really care what happens in these places. And in some cases, they might be right. So the idea, again, is that, by improving these vacant lots, by beautifying them, by taking care of them, you are showing that you care about this community and you care about the people inside that community. Again, it might be a little hippy-dippy for some folks, but I mean, honestly, as a Second Amendment guy who cares about public safety, you offer me an approach that does not involve my Second Amendment rights, doesn't implicate our right to keep and bear arms at all, I'm willing to hear you out. I'm willing to hear you out because you're not talking about you trying to ban or arrest our way to safety on the back of our Second Amendment rights. Powell also talked to a guy named David Kelly. He writes, in a former school building that now houses the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, a Catholic group that is a member of United Power and focuses on building relationships with families and youth scarred by violence. The director, he met the director, David Kelly, a lean man with a baritone voice. Kelly, who is a priest, told Powell that he holds a monthly meeting with mothers and grandmothers. He said, we have over 100 mothers who have lost children to homicide. He explained how a desolate landscape amplifies the neighborhood's threats. He says, you have such open lands. There's no grocery store here. There's no Target. There's none of that stuff. And the kids know that it's dangerous to walk anywhere. So why wouldn't they carry guns? Which, again, is an acknowledgement that we don't typically hear. We certainly haven't heard that from J.B. Pritzker or from Brandon Johnson. Again, they would say, well, it's the availability of guns, right? It's the fact that people can go across the border into Indiana and buy truckloads of guns and then haul them back into Chicago, which, again, we know is not the case. But that's what they will blame, right? They won't say why people might want to carry a firearm for personal protection, legally or illegally, in the city of Chicago. Again, for them, it's a supply side issue. If you reduce the supply of firearms, then violent crime goes down. It's the more guns equals more crime hypothesis. What Ludwig is talking about, what Kelly is talking about, and what others like David Kennedy at John Jay College of Criminal Justice talks about, is reducing the demand for firearms among those who would criminally misuse those firearms. Now, some people might say, well, let's just drop the demand for firearms in general, right? For both lawful gun owners and illegal gun owners. But again, if you're wanting to focus on reducing violent crime, you don't have to drop the demand for guns among legal gun owners, for folks who would use those firearms for lawful purposes, right? You focus on that small number of individuals who are misusing firearms to commit carjackings, armed robberies, home invasions, drive-by shootings. And if you can reduce the demand for weapons among those individuals, then again, you can see a dramatic reduction in violent crime. How do you reduce the demand? Well, a couple of ways. You reduce the demand by making sure that those who use firearms in the commission of a violent crime suffer severe consequences. That reduces demand. Programs like Operation Ceasefire, which, among others, Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares has done a great job of implementing across the Commonwealth, reduce demand for firearms among that small cohort of individuals by offering them a way out of this cycle of violence. If you stop shooting, then we will help you. We'll help you get your GED. We'll help you get your high school diploma. We'll get you counseling if you need to talk to somebody. We'll get you a mentor. We'll help put you in a job training program. We will help to put your life on a different path if you stop shooting, if you stop committing these criminal acts. And again, programs like that have a proven track record of success without putting more gun control laws on the books. Homicide rates have dropped in some places by more than 50%. Because you're not casting this wide net of criminality over every legal gun owner and say, well, you can't own that magazine, you can't own that gun, you can't carry that gun there. These are people, again, who aren't going to commit a violent crime. So why would we create crimes that might put them in prison for exercising their Second Amendment rights? When the issue, again, is that small number of individuals who will commit these acts of violence. And this is something that the Chicago mayor, Governor Pritzker, anti-gun Democrats in general, just either don't get or don't care about, because they really do care more about banning guns and obliterating our fundamental civil right to keep and bear arms than they do about successfully combating violent crime. Something similar is going on in St. Paul, Minnesota right now, where the city council introduced this local ordinance last night. It would ban so-called assault weapons, large capacity magazines, binary triggers. It can't be enforced because Minnesota has a firearms preemption law. But rather than doing something that works, Mayor Melvin Carter and several city council members want to play political theater about this. They want to say, well, we can't fight violent crime unless we have gun control, which is nonsense. You absolutely can. It doesn't even require more policing or more prosecutors. It just requires an approach that focuses on the most prolific and violent offenders instead of trying to keep people away from their right to keep and bear arms. This isn't rocket science. It's not some hidden secret. as Michael Powell says, it's a choice. And the politicians in Chicago have made this choice. Politicians in St. Paul, Minnesota are making this choice to go after people who aren't the problem and to ignore a small number of individuals who are. Which brings us to today's recidivist report, which comes to us from Chicago. CWB Chicago, which does a great job of reporting on crime in the Windy City, has this story. Man who got probation for red line robbery, now jailed in earlier train attack. Yeah. I remember J.B. Pritzker wouldn't say whether or not he would recommend to his friends that they ride public transit in Chicago late at night. It is illegal to have a weapon on Chicago Transit Authority property. Even if you possess a valid concealed carry license, you are breaking the law if you try to carry on CTA property. And yet, crimes on public transportation in Chicago are, they're commonplace. I could run a story almost every day about a shooting or a robbery on CTA property. And I don't. Every now and then I'll highlight a particularly egregious case because I think it is an egregious infringement on our Second Amendment rights that people who depend on public transportation in Chicago cannot exercise their right to keep and bear arms before they get on that train or bus, after they get on that train or bus, and while they're on that train or bus. That prohibition deprives people of their ability to bear arms throughout the entirety of their day. In many cases. And I will continue to highlight these egregious cases. In this particular case, 28-year-old William McGee is accused, along with a group of accomplices, of attacking a 30-year-old man on a red line train back last May 2024. No weapon other than fists or feet were used. The group allegedly beat the man, stole his belongings before they fled. CWB Chicago reports a week later, Chicago police released surveillance photos of several suspects, but those efforts failed to drum up any good information, and the case went cold. That changed last week when the victim picked McGee out of a photo lineup by identifying him as the man who punched him in the face and took his phone during the attack. Judge Deidre Dyer ordered McGee detained on charges of robbery and aggravated battery of a transit passenger. But as CWB Chicago reports, 4 weeks after that robbery in May of 2024, McGee was arrested for another similar crime. June 6th, 2024. 35-year-old man riding a red line train. Several people attack him, punch him, steal his backpack. Surveillance footage shows McGee trying to rip the bag off the victim while two others beat the man. McGee was charged in that case, and in April of this year, he pleaded guilty to unlawful restraint. In exchange, prosecutors dropped robbery and aggravated battery charges, and McGee got 1 year probation for this crime. Again, crime is a choice. Crime is a choice. As CWB Chicago says, months after that plea, McGee's now experienced a bit of deja vu, sitting in jail awaiting trial for allegedly attacking and robbing somebody on the red line. And can we guarantee that McGee is going to get prison time this time around? Nope. It is entirely possible that Mr. McGee will once again be offered a plea deal that amounts to nothing more than probation, maybe time served while you're awaiting trial, and that'll be it. Again, crime is a choice. And in Chicago, when you have prosecutors who are offering such sweetheart plea deals to violent offenders, that's a choice. They don't have to do that. They can take these cases to trial. This guy was caught on surveillance video, for God's sakes. They could offer a plea deal that results in some prison time rather than nothing more than probation. That's their choice. Crime is a choice. It is also a choice again, to deprive people of their ability to protect themselves. And that is a choice that Governor J.B. Pritzker has made. It's a choice that the Illinois legislature has made. It's a choice that Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has made. And those are choices that put people at risk of being harmed by people like Mr. McGee. Now on to today's armed citizen story. From South Carolina, a man who kicked an apartment door was shot and killed. Richland County Sheriff says this was an act of self-defense, according to the Richland County Sheriff's Office. The Sun News reporting this was Monday, about 10:30 at night. Deputies responded to a shooting in a part of Columbia, South Carolina, between Interstate 77 and South Carolina Highway 277. When they got to this apartment, they found a man who'd been shot. EMS took the individual to an area hospital where he passed away from his injuries. So far, the individual has not been identified by police, but deputies determined that the man in question had kicked in the door of this apartment, forcing his way inside. And that is when he was shot by one of the individuals inside. There was also a witness on the scene who corroborated the account of the armed citizen. Sun News says information about why the man broke into the apartment was not available. No word on if he knew the occupants of the apartment prior to the incident, but once he was inside, again, the armed citizen was able to get a firearm, shooting the intruder. Both the shooter and witness spoke with investigators after the shooting. I would say, again, we've talked about this with Barry Todd just a couple of days ago. Even if you're in the clear, I would wait until you've got an attorney with you to talk to police, even no matter how cooperative you want to be. It's always a good idea to have an attorney present when you're giving any sort of official statement like that. According to the Sun News, investigators determined that there was sufficient physical evidence of forced entry. Based on the physical evidence as well as the interviews, determined that the shooting was considered a justifiable homicide. The Sheriff's Department has now closed that investigation. They will present the results of that investigation to the local prosecutor, and I'm guessing that's about as far as things will go. The prosecutor will decline charges as well, based again on the evidence there at the scene and the testimony of eyewitnesses. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. A 15-year-old in North Braddock, Pennsylvania, who helped his neighbor from a house fire. It is, we're going to be that time of year, you know, we got space heaters that are catching fire. I mean, fires can happen any time of the year, but I think it's a little bit more common in the fall and winter months. Xavion McMillan Taylor had just gotten off the school bus Thursday. I think this was his last Thursday, when he heard a woman screaming that her house had caught fire. The woman's a school crossing guard. She's known by neighbors as Ms. Evelyn. Xavion's mom, Tallulah Thompson, said she's everybody's family. She's everybody's grandmother. She is the caretaker, actually, for Ms. Evelyn's granddaughter as well. She said that her son ran inside the home to help Ms. Evelyn. Thompson said he's autistic. He's very intelligent, but he's never experienced nothing like this before. So first he tried to put the fire out, and then when he couldn't, he pulled her out of the home. She explained that Evelyn, who multiple people say has dementia, had gone back inside the home despite the fire, which is why her son jumped into action. She said, he said, when I got to the kitchen, I saw the engulfing flames. He said they were small, and I was like, oh my God. So I had to grab her by the hand, and I had to pull her to get her out of the house. She apparently re-entered the home multiple times, according to Xavion's mom, who also helped get her out at least on one occasion while her son called 911. Xavion said he was scared during the ordeal, but said he felt like he had to help. Another neighbor, identified as a Tracy Muselick, said Evelyn threw her arms around him and thanked him so graciously for saving her, adding that Xavion's our hero. 15-year-old was asked about that, do you think you're a hero? And he said he does, because he was helping another person. Unfortunately, the home, a total loss, but Miss Evelyn is okay. Xavion's mom says, I'm very proud of what he's done. She says, of course I am, because who knows, if she didn't call him up there, she'd probably be still in there trying to do it herself, and we might have lost her. The mayor of North Braddock, a man named Cletus Lee, Says he's working to make sure that the Evelyn has clothes and a place to stay, looking to see if the borough can recognize the teens' actions. I would like to think that they can. I think North Braddock is where John Fetterman was mayor. So who knows? Maybe John Fetterman can do something nice for Xavier McMillan Taylor, and maybe we can have some sort of Senate recognition for his heroism as well. But anyway, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing for a stranger in need, a 15-year-old Xavier McMillan Taylor. We thank you for your very, very good deed. And again, I want to thank you, as always, for being a part of the program. I really appreciate you being here. Again, really glad that I was able to do the show today. We will be back on Monday, but be sure to check out BearingArms.com throughout the day. Tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday, I will be off on a regularly scheduled day off tomorrow, but Tom Knighton's going to cover everything that's going on in the world of the Second Amendment. I will have some contributions over the weekend as well. I may be taking a day off, but I feel weird about taking a 3-day weekend. So yeah, I will have some stories for you as well on Saturday and Sunday. But be sure, again, to check out the website between now and Monday. We are going to keep you up to date on everything that's going on in the world of the Second Amendment. Legislation, litigation, regulation, the culture war attacks on our right to keep and bear arms, and the culture war offenses to demonize, to normalize the exercise of our right to keep arms. We are seeing those efforts happening around the country as well. All right. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Until we talk again, be well, be safe, and be free.